Welcome to the Omnigamersclub podcast, the podcast for games on all platforms, including while playing the beta of a physical card game. My name is Mark USA.
I am Daniel Winter.
Hello, Daniel. How are you?
Good. We've had some rainy weather here in Vancouver, so perfect for starting to catch up on that summer backlog.
Very nice. Yeah, it's up and down. It's that tumultuous fall season. Things are feeling a little spooky, Halloween style, with the kids talking about Halloween costumes and this and that. But not quite there yet. Still early in October here. So this is our playlist episode where we're going to be talking about, just generally stuff we've been playing, news stories that caught our eyes and ears. And of course, next episode, we have our full game feature to be talking about. So did you want to start off with some news today?
Yeah, but a bit of a smattering of a few smaller things. Obviously, Essensspiel is happening right now in Germany, arguably the biggest board game convention, though largely more industry focused than playing games, right? So I haven't really looked too deep into that. Like every time I go to Board Game Geek and it's like, here's 500 games coming out Essensspiel, and like my eyes glaze over, right? I'll get to them when I get to them. I'm not trying to. I don't want to trigger that FOMO. But it looks like everyone's having a lot of fun over there. I did just want to mention quickly a couple of crowdfunding campaigns, though. That is two specifically that are both digital adaptations of tabletop role-playing games. Got it out there. Okay, so the first is Morkborg, Heresy Supreme. So Morkborg's a system I'm not particularly familiar with. Obviously very counterculture, sort of black metal vibes. It's been popping up quite a lot in the last few years, especially in terms of third-party sort of hacks of that system. You got like Pirate Borg and all other various...
Cyborg.
There you go. Yeah, various spin-offs. But this is the first, as far as I know, the first digital version of that system, playing with the similar aesthetic. Very, not quite... I mean, Dark Souls, I guess, in sort of tone, that very esoteric, grim gothic fantasy, but in a much more sort of pop-punk graphic experimental art style. So yeah, it looks quite stylish. I don't know much about the gameplay yet, but that could be interesting visually, if nothing else.
Yeah, I know that Morkborg is based in PBTA, Powered by the Apocalypse, and might be Forged in the Dark specifically, but I don't know. Things are, sit loosely with those terms now and again. The Morkborg is, I haven't played it myself, but I know that it's very sort of like grim dark, in your face, but not exactly so dark. It's a little bit sort of like glitch punky. Even the supposedly medieval themed Morkborg, which is I think a Swedish word, if I'm not mistaken, Swedish publishers, has a very sort of glitchy digital graphic art style, very punchy, colorful, very contrasty in your face, and it's just become a sensation over the last few years in the indie RPG scene. So much so that all those competitors came out. But I don't know how much the video game you were talking about has to do with the RPG. I think it's more, isn't it like an action game or something like that?
Yeah, it's a 2D action game. Again, looking a little bit like sort of Dark Souls in vibe and tone, and especially the setting sounds about as esoteric as a black metal logo, and trying to decipher what's going on there. So I'm not entirely sure, but it has some visual style, nothing else.
Well, good for them then. It's good to see that indie RPG makes it bigger. Anyway, that's very nice for them.
And a little closer to home, there is one more digital video game adaptation of Pathfinder, specifically the second edition. I know there's been a couple of CRPGs in that world that I think I've spoken about previously. Kingmaker, I think I played and quite enjoyed for as far as I've gotten. So this new one is called Pathfinder: The Dragon's Demand, and is being produced by a local studio here in Vancouver, apparently. Veterans of the Neverwinter Nights series, apparently. So they have some experience in that, playing in that oeuvre. I don't know much about Pathfinder and how it differs. It definitely seems to be playing very much in the virtual tabletop space in terms of it's actually simulating the miniatures on the board. It's static miniatures that you're moving on a tactical grid. But still a single player CRPG, right? So playing into the aesthetic of dudes on a map or on the table, shared space, rolling physical dice, and so on. So again, playing with some different, slightly different aesthetics in that CRPG space.
Right. Yeah, I haven't played the other Owlcat, I think is the
yes.
publisher that does the other more well-known Pathfinder games. But this one looks to be an interesting twist, more tabletop inspired, like you said, and less sort of CRPG like BioWare games of yesteryear. So this could be an interesting twist on the platform.
Absolutely. And those are both on Kickstarter right now. I'll drop the links in the show notes.
Very nice. All right, I guess I'll mention one that came to my attention. So we were just talking about CCGs, TCGs last episode with our coverage of the Lorcana, Disney's Lorcana game. And so I had TCGs on my mind, and wouldn't you know it, they just announced a new one. I think it's Namco Bandai, if I'm not mistaken, announced a new one based on the very popular Gundam universe. So this is Gundam Card Game, or GCG. And it's not yet out. It's I think they're going to be opening pre-sale for a beta kit first, which is something I alluded to. So they're selling it for the MSRP of $69.99, which is fairly high. Nice. But there's little detail on what's included there, and that's going to be shipping out to U.S. addresses only, at least on the English website.
So beta in like select markets, I guess. Interesting.
Yeah, that's right. So it's going to be going out in December of this year, 2024, but it's going to have wide release in 2025. And I think it's simultaneous release worldwide, or at least English-speaking languages and Japan, the home base, so to speak. So yeah, I look. There's videos on YouTube that will do some explainers of the rules. Took a look. There's actually some interesting twists there. So I'm cautiously optimistic, but I don't know. Japanese TCGs, they're not terribly deep. They take a lot of leads from Magic the Gathering and things like that. So I don't know if this will have an extended life outside of its home country. But Gundam is very popular, so you never know.
Yeah, I'm not familiar with that IP, but I know it's pretty widespread in terms. So there's been how many dozens of different Gundam series. There's obviously a deep well to pull on there in terms of reference material that they similar to Lorcana and the different variants and different universe. Is it all one setting in Gundam, or are there like parallel or alternate versions? Like how does that fit together?
There are a number of them that sort of link together in the same universe, but the vast majority of them are in their own alternate universes.
Okay.
And the basic theme of it, they've been going on since the 1970s. So it's basically like Japan's Star Wars, equivalent to Star Wars. So there's all twists and turns. And generally, the theme is there's like a kind of an established faction, like the Earth Federation, and then there's this sort of rebel breakoff faction called the Principality of Zeon. And the main character is either on one side or the other, and they sort of flip it around. And usually, it's sort of the birthplace of the whole shonen Shinji get in the mech sort of all those memes of emotional emo pilots that are destined to be the only ones to take control of the massive fighting machine. But there have been many twists and turns, such as the Witch from Mercury, which was the latest series, which only lasted for 2 short seasons before it was canceled. But it was playing with some fun ideas, like the first woman protagonist character in all of its 40-plus year history, and some interesting Gundam designs. And hey, it's just a fun excuse to sell flashy toys and plastic models, so we all love it. And video games.
Several friends deep into that side of the hobby. Yeah, no, I've had a couple of friends recommend that Witch from Mercury. Apparently, it's all available on YouTube for free. So if you're interested in checking out some Gundam, maybe check that out. And then if that bites, then you've got the card game waiting. So
there's many ways in. There's video games, there's card games, there's of course the TV shows and movies, and the plastic models are a huge phenomenon in their own right.
Excellent. Okay, well, speaking of mechs, I see something else on your notes here.
That's right. Yeah. So Mechs, it doesn't just stop with Gundam. There is an interesting RPG backer kit campaign that I saw. It's something called Salvage Union, and I don't know a lot about this, but apparently it mostly came out last year, and then they're releasing like a starter set this time. And the art for this looks really cool. You can find it at backer kit right now. Salvage Union, by the way, not Savage Union. And the premise is that unlike Gundam or whatnot, you're just all on one planet, and then it's sort of like dusty post-apocalypse. Everyone's struggling to survive, but instead of Mad Max driving in old muscle cars of previous generation, you're riding in sort of clunky mechs that need tuning, maybe like a little bit leaning closer to the like Nausicaa Princess Valley of the Wind, as opposed to something flashy like Gundam or things like that. So I think the art style looks quite cool. I haven't looked too much closely into the rules, but that campaign is running until November 4th. So you folks should have a check and see if it's to your interest.
Yeah, one of my friends, Ian, over at Giant Brain, just put out a review of that, the original version last week, which was quite interesting. He seemed to think that the tactics were quite interesting, but there wasn't much in terms of story or character hooks to really drive the players forward there. So hopefully, with this new starter kit, they're fleshing out that side of things.
Yeah, that's interesting to hear. Obviously, when you talk about RPGs and mechs, you think of the big, I don't know, not 800-pound gorilla, maybe like 300-pound gorilla. Lancer is the popular title.
Yes, yeah.
I think they covered it on Quinn's Quest. I haven't got the opportunity to play Lancer, but I hear that it's incredibly crunchy. You need like an app to be able to create your character sheet, for one. And it's mostly to do with very tight tactical rules for mech-based combat. And the system doesn't really encourage a lot of, I guess, social play. But this is just stuff I'm hearing secondhand. So
Yeah, that's part
I
and
think that
parcel of the genre in terms of like BattleTech and all the other mech video games tend to be pretty granular in the simulation aspect and so many different systems and micromanaging the interface of your mech, right? So I mean something that's a little more plug and play, perhaps playing in that same oeuvre would be fun. Yeah.
for sure. I don't know anyone who's not interested in piloting a mech even just once to try it out in a fantasy world. Okay. One last news story I just heard about today, and I think they might have just released the news today, is that 343 Industries, which was the Microsoft-owned, I guess, holding company that controls the Halo license and puts out the Halo games, is rebranding as Halo Studios. And with that, they just announced that they are switching from the in-house game engine to Unreal 5. So they put out a promo video. Clearly, this is sort of strategic marketing language here, but it sounds like they want to really, I don't know, convince audiences and fans that they're striking off into new directions here, that they have new energy invested, because let's face it, Halo Infinite was not the blockbuster earth-shaking hit that they probably hoped that it would be, and there was a lot of doubt as to where this series would go into the future. We covered Halo a little bit in our episode where we talked about Halo 4 and 5
Yes.
Guardians,
Yeah.
I think. But we didn't talk too much about Infinite, and to be honest, I kind of lost interest in it. Its open world formula with a very samey backdrop, although albeit, quite lovely environments. But just a little too samey. Too much of just that one biome. So we'll see.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to know what exactly that means in layman's terms. It's hard to be excited about the technical changes in the back end. Hopefully, the people making those games are excited about it and bring some sort of fresh inspiration and opportunities there.
Right. Yeah. That promo, basically, the summary of it was they're hoping to stop fighting the technical side and just go with the creative side and try new interesting things. And they did show some placeholder, some conceptual stuff, and it did look quite lovely. Like the natural environment looked great, and they were already trying some new, visiting some new and familiar terrains. that from other games in Halo's past.
Well, I'd love to be excited about Halo again.
Wouldn't that be nice? All right, shall we roll into games you've been playing then?
Yeah, well, I was just cover one final topic I want to talk a little bit about is that I watched a video recently from game designer Amabel Holland on rules in games, both board games and video games to a lesser extent. And it was a fascinating video that covered a lot of broad topics. I could chase down any one of a dozen different tangents, but I just thought it's an interesting topic I've been dwelling on a little bit lately, and just in thinking how games represent themselves through rules. And I mean, I think one of the theses of that video specifically was like, rules aren't just something to teach you the game; they are always there as part of the game, and they represent the game, but and the designer. They don't have to just be this dry like war game. I think basically it looks like a legal textbook, right? In terms of 35.1 B, how to move a character into an adjacent space, right? They can be rules can be so much more alive in how they bring you into that world and how they bring you into the designer's mindset. I've been thinking a little bit about Clinic. You can see behind me here is one example I was thinking of by Albin Viard, and he always inserts these little moments of sort of black comedy that sort of help frame the rule. Like both it is funny, but also help you internalize and memify that that rule set, right? So it's a fascinating topic I've been thinking about in terms of how games represent themselves. I don't know if you had any thoughts on that.
Yeah, I definitely do. I mean, I've tried my hand at designing board games in the past. I'm trying my hand at designing tabletop role-playing games right now, and learning and reading about all these different, basically game systems, game engines, you could say, if you're talking from a digital perspective side, like we just talked about with Halo Studios. These sort of frameworks say a lot about how the style with which you should play a game. And I don't think every game system is right for every setting or subject. But I do think that some game systems really encourage a certain type of play. And really that's where what you're saying really resonates with me. Certain types of, narrative forward games work really well with systems like Powered by the Apocalypse, because it's very narrative forward. It's based on the innovations that the Fate system made, and there's some great things about Cypher too. But I feel like I don't know it well enough that I have to sort of fight with it a little bit, or like remind myself how to best utilize it. And then there's systems that are so sort of ornate and so structured and limited that you actually really have to fight the system to be able to tell interesting stories, or I have found in my past. So definitely the rules do affect how you play. Absolutely. In board games like role-playings as well.
Yeah, it's a fine art. But curiously, one of the topics was covered in the video was video games. Like rule books of video games is something that the industry has distanced itself years ago, right? But one of the big topics she covers is Super Mario Brothers. I mean, back in those days, games came with instruction manuals that told you not just how to play the game, but also set the tone for the world and the backstory that they couldn't get into the 16 bits, right? Or the 8 bits. But also like hints, like giving you suggestions for how some of the mechanics play out that wouldn't otherwise necessarily be obvious. Like, do you let the player figure out these systems for themselves, or do you give hints in the rulebook? And that's partly why I was thinking about this a lot in terms of a game I've been playing lately. So here comes the tangent, is that last playlist I was talking about UFO 50, this sort of faux collection of 50 games from the fictional LX system. And like these are very much NES era, ZX Spectrum, I think was the other sort of console of that era that people have been comparing it to, and it very much feels like the days of going to Blockbuster and renting out Lost Vikings or whatever the game was at the day, and no instruction manual in there, and these games didn't have instructions in the built into the game itself. So how do you figure out how to play these games? In that sense, UFO 50 is obviously pulling on a lot of lessons learnt from the last 3 decades of game making, while still playing with that sense of obscurity in mechanics. Because there's no instructions including here, it feels a little bit like sort of this digital archaeology. Like there's this list of the cartridges, all covered in cobwebs, and when you select one for the first time, the cobwebs fly off. You're blowing out the dust of the cartridge, right? And then you've got to figure out how to play this game. It's like, so the first one I've been playing is Barbuta. It throws you in. It looks very much like a little Metroidvania. You play a little dude exploring this sort of 2D grid map, and you walk one step to the right, trap falls, you die. One of those games. And then so walk to the left a little way and try and hit some monsters that you can't defeat. And it's very like you're not sure what you're supposed to even be doing here. What's the goal here? Who am I? Why am I here? You gradually start piecing this together bit by bit, poking and prodding at the walls, right? So that's been fascinating in terms of just trying to figure out what even is this game without having that framework. And it's a great experimentation in games being built with the limitations of that era. Very very focused, right? Like these games don't have broad scope or like deep mechanics. There's 2 buttons. That's all you can do. But so it's a very clear expression of design intent. So you can really feel the designer's influence in each decision, because it's probably like what 1 or 2 people made these, right?
Yeah, I remember you talking about another game that you tried out in the past that was featuring that little fox. It's about
Tunic.
putting the rule book together,
yeah.
right? Yeah, I was reminded of that when you were telling me about game manuals. I mean, I'm old enough to remember when an era when game manuals exist. Of course, if you were fortunate enough to buy a game retail, it would come with the game manual. Sometimes they would come with a strategy guide, a mini strategy guide, like the Dragon Warrior, aka Dragon Quest 1, when it came out in the American audience, because they didn't think Americans would be ready for a video RPG.
Well, there might be a map in there that it would be impossible to solve a dungeon without the map that's in the instruction manual.
Right. And in a past life, I had a podcast about interactive fiction games, text adventure games. And in that era, they used the manual as a copy protection tool.
Yeah.
So they would say that on page 33, you have to enter in the first word in the 3rd paragraph from the top of the page. And that would be your code to progress to the rest of the game, because it was easy to copy those floppy disks. So yeah, I agree. I think rules manuals have a strong history. Obviously, it's alive and kicking in the board game and certainly the TTRPG space, because in that case, the rule book is all you have.
Yeah, so I didn't want to get too in the weeds into UFO 50. I'm taking my time with this. It's this sort of collection where one of the other tropes back in the day was you get a CD-ROM, 101 games, right? And you try 3 of them and they're all rubbish and move it on. And I could feel myself here. These games do have those limitations. They're not say that they're deliberately bad, but they're deliberately playing with the friction of older games in fascinating ways that if you played for half an hour, okay, not for me, I'll move on to the next one. Okay, let me try the next one. But I'm forcing myself to focus and do one at a time and poke at it enough until I at least get what it's going for. I'm following along with a podcast I discovered called The Eggplant Show, I think. It's got some various game designers talking about what one of these games each week. They're going to do that for the next year. So I'm trying to follow along with that and really dive in deep to some of these games. It's just a fascinating case study in game design through history.
Very nice. Speaking of retro games, last playlist episode, I talked about the remake of The Link Between Worlds, I think it was. Not The Link Between Worlds, whatever the previous
Link's Awakening.
2D... Link's Awakening, yes. Previous 2D Zelda game that was remade on Switch. And of course, now since they've released the new Zelda game, Legend of Zelda game, featuring Princess Zelda as the protagonist.
Echoes of Wisdom, I think is the name. Yeah.
Yeah, I have not yet sprung the cash to play that new game, although people say that it's fantastic, so I'm looking forward to trying it out. But what I did try was another remake on the Nintendo Switch, because that's what that machine is good for, is rehashing old games of Nintendo glory past. So I tried Super Mario RPG, which was I never tried back in the day, but as it's sort of legendary. It was a RPG by Square, not Square Enix, Square Soft, if I'm not mistaken. And for all intents and purposes, it was quite solid and quite cute and did really interesting things. And I can tell you that the remake is lovely. It's charming. There's so much character and charm in that game, and some interesting game mechanics as well. I only got to play it for a short while, but I was pleasantly delighted by the time I did get to play, and it was a sort of a whole 180 from my experience between Link's Awakening, because I didn't love how that game was treated.
And they've done quite a bit of work here to remaster this, right?
They did, yeah. It's I think the original actually looks really quite cool. It had this sort of interesting isometric, but sort of like almost like a claymation style, because it came out on Super Nintendo, if I'm not mistaken.
It's like the claymation that you used to see in the Nintendo Power magazine.
Right, and other even games, like I think there was like Clay Fighters and things like that for Super Nintendo. Obviously, that system had a great support of a number of colors, which made the artwork look a lot more lush than 2D games that came before it. So that game certainly looked great, but this one just kind of fully fleshes it out with 3D polygons as well. But they stick to that isometric perspective, and it works great. Very cool. I won't say much more than that because I didn't get to play very much of it.
Yeah, I unfortunately missed that era of Nintendo RPGs. I mean, there's only you can't really get through much of them, borrowing them from the Blockbuster, right? So, and I never bought those RPGs, so missed out on that and Chrono Trigger on those classic longer RPG games from that era.
Right,
unfortunately.
and I think that era of cartridges also were quite expensive for RPGs because you had to pay for the battery pack or whatever that would store the live memory on it as well. Because back then, the memory was on the cartridge.
Yeah.
Yeah, and of course that would be wiped when you returned it to the rental store too.
Funny you mention Echoes of Wisdom, though. I also have not sprung the money for that yet. I've been forcing myself instead to try and finally finish Tears of the Kingdom. So which we obviously talked again. We did a feature episode on that last year. I am surprisingly, I'm enjoying it. I'm playing through with my daughter again, and she's finding new enjoyment out of that game. Still incredibly frustrating though, just in terms of the arthritic vice-like claw that you have to pull off some of these mechanics, and the repetitive quest rewards. Like these elaborate quests all have 100 rupees as the reward. Nothing more exciting than that. There's still something super just engaging with just that core loop, even if it's like a self-imposed fetch quest basically, but the way that the different layers feed into each other and constantly feeding you from one area of the map to the next is just a super engaging loop. And my daughter's encouraging, oh, go jump down that hole, oh, go check out that horse, and all these little micro goals that we're training together, and still having fun with that despite all of the frustrations.
Right. Yeah, I do need to go back to Tears of the Kingdom. Yes, I did beat the previous one on Switch, which is Breath
of the Wild.
I'm terrible. I'm sorry. I did. I promise. I promise I do actually play video games. Yeah. But no, my kid, I'm super impressed that they totally were down to like the second to last shrine or whatever in Tears of the Kingdom. So I just thought to myself, I just don't have the dedication that you do. To be young. Yeah, exactly. Okay, one last video game I'm going to talk about. Actually, I'm going to be tricky and talk about 1.5. So I've been playing games while going on the exercise bike again, trying to get back on that horse. And I have been playing Diablo 2 on Xbox with a controller of all things. And I know that some people are going to gasp and throw rotten tomatoes at me. You shouldn't play that game with controller, they says. But that's the device I had, and that's the thing that's in front of my exercise bike. So I tried that. It's fun. It's great. Whatever. And then I realized that Path of Exile is also on Xbox. So I booted that up, and I'm really enjoying it. I haven't gotten very far in it, but while Diablo 2 seems kind of old and clunky, which it is, it's an older game that they remastered, so of course it would be, feel a little bit old compared to a newer game. Path of Exile is already coming out with a sequel soon-ish. I don't think it's out yet, but it just seemed like it smoothed over a lot more things. It's a lot deeper in some ways, and I like what it's doing with some of the equipment. It's a little bit more generous in terms of drops earlier levels. And also the character upgrade path is doing some really interesting stuff.
A giant spider web.
Right. It reminds me a
Mm.
lot of, I don't know, Final Fantasy,
Oh,
Final
the
Fantasy
core
games
grids or something.
of age who's gone by.
Mm.
Yeah, like 10 or 11 or whatnot. 11's the MMO. Never mind. It's like 10 or something like that. I know
That
it's
sounds about
not
right.
12 because 12 is actually quite cool with the little grid shapes that they have there. But anyways, I'm really super impressed. I don't know why I didn't get into this earlier. Plays just fine with controller, so
Excellent.
it's serving me well, and it's free to play, so it's great. Go check it out. I know I'm 10 years behind, but I'm enjoying it.
Yeah, I only played a little bit of that. There was something incredibly compelling about that skill spiderweb, though, and wanting to see it all gradually unlock, and you can sort of spiral away in interesting directions, and a lot of customization in that. And I seem to recall there being a lot of customization too in how you could like combine spells or combine items and spells. It's probably changed like dozens of patches later, but it was incredibly dynamic in the way you could combine items is what I mostly recall from that.
Yeah, I look forward to learning the details like that. I'm only playing a rogue right now, so I don't have access to spells, but it's already doing cool stuff with like socketing of gems, which is a little bit more flexible than Diablo 2 anyway. And it just has some nice like quality of life things, like the way that it uses the potions, both healing and mana. Just nice touches. The mapping is good. The environments look good. So yeah, I'm just really impressed by
Speaking
that
of
game.
playing games on the treadmill, I think it was on the Besties I heard someone saying that you can play World of Warcraft on the Xbox controller now. That's apparently a good treadmill game.
That would be interesting. I tried playing World of Warcraft on the Lenovo Legion Go a little while ago, and it was an absolute nightmare. And
Probably
maybe
for the best.
yeah, maybe it'll be tighter in an official controller
Mm.
conversion, because obviously Microsoft owns
Wouldn't see it surprising coming to
Blizzard
actual
now.
Xbox soon. Yeah.
Right. Bundle it in with the Xbox Game Pass payment, and then you'll have a bunch of fans jumping on
I
that
can't go back.
bandwagon.
Don't take me back there.
Yeah, a friend of mine got that 2-week pass when you first buy the game, right?
Right.
And this was way back in the day on launch window, and he gave it to me, the pass to play. I played for 2 weeks, and then I shut it away and never tried it again. Well, until
Throw away the
recently.
key.
Yeah, exactly. Because like, nope, that's going to be trouble. Goodbye. All right, that's it for me in video games.
Excellent. Should we jump to the tabletop?
Absolutely. Why don't you start us off?
Yeah, I just wanted to talk quickly about a game I picked up at PAX last year and finally got to the table. That is Token Terrors. So this comes in a really interesting square box. It reminds me of some of the aesthetics from the 90s toy craze of like, Boglins, and so it was real sort of punk rock weird creature toys and things you get. Necromolds currently is playing with those similar vibes of the sort of the collectible toys from the 90s. So Token Terrors, you've got these basically a whole collection of these tiny little plastic dudes of like skeletons and zombies and orcs and these like little squat minis, but yeah, they're basically little squat little totems almost.
Hmm. They
In
look like the Kinnikuman, the Ultimate Muscle characters, sort of
I
like
don't know that reference.
erasers. All right, your generation and mine are slightly separated, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But basically, I mean, part of the appeal of these was that they could be used as Magic the Gathering tokens. But there's also an actual little tactical game built into the box, and so partly just the aesthetic of this I really liked. So it's one fellow who designed the game and did all the artwork himself, John DeCampos. And there's just a lot of character and flavor in the way like the artwork. It's like literally hundreds of these figures just jammed into like the board, the box on the cover. It's really grabbing artwork there. There's a little comic book in there in the box, so lots of flavor. But the actual game itself, you're basically drafting. I think there's like six or seven of these different types of units, and it's 2-player game only. You take turns drafting which of these units you're going to use, and then once you've chosen those, you basically draft up to you basically end up with 10 figures total, and that can be spread across 2 to 4 types of units, right? And then it's a little bit randomized as to what order they come out. You put them onto this little square grid, very chess-like. That's like a 6x6 grid or thereabouts, and then it becomes a very deterministic little battle of moving units, attacking. Generally very deterministic. There is a dice roll in terms of retaliation or avoiding ranged attacks, but mostly you go in knowing exactly how much damage is going to be dealt either way. So it is. I think that's part of my main concern is that I think it is a really interesting tactical game, but it does really quickly get into the weeds of sitting there staring at it for 5 minutes, trying to math out every little result. Where with the aesthetic and the design of this game, it really feels like you just want to be rolling handfuls of dice and just keep this thing moving, right? And so I think for those who like those abstract tactical games, this is quite appealing. I think I'd need to play it a couple more times to like see if we can get into the groove a little more. And now that we know the rules. But the aesthetic and the game itself don't entirely jive, in my opinion. But I do really like what's there.
That's cool. Yeah, so no determination just yet as to the final vote.
It's just the first impressions.
Yeah, sounds intriguing though. All right, I'll talk about a board game that I've been playing, but on the digital side. So I've been playing a lot of Orleans. I think I told you last time.
We've been playing some Orleans.
Yes, that's right. You and I have. And I'm trying out a bunch of different strategies. This is kind of what I like to do when a game I enjoy or I'm into comes on BGA, is I like to play a lot of games, try a bunch of different things, and see how it pans out. And the first results have come in, and I am not good. I am failing to win the vast majority of games that I'm playing, which is teaching me that the strategies I'm applying are not winning strategies, at least the way that I'm executing them. So this is a good thing. I'm learning to try out more things. And that's the great thing as well, is that you can, pretty closely compare what the point breakdowns are of the games that you play with other people. You can even rewind and replay some of the game strategies and see the final state of things. So I'm going to use this as an opportunity to learn, because I still enjoy this game, and even the base game has a lot of legs in it, I feel like, and I'd like to be able to at least win as many games as I lose, perhaps.
If you're doing testing like that, it's definitely a lot easier to sort of just chew through a bunch of different strategies in one go like that. But listening to that rules video I was telling you about earlier, it did bring to mind some of my reservations around BGA and just how difficult it is to actually internalize some of the rules. And I do play a lot of games on BGA, largely async, but so often this feels like I'm going through the motions, to be honest, and not really internalizing the cause and effect of what I'm doing and what the game is doing behind the scenes, what other players are doing. And it's really not my ideal way of really thinking too heavily about the strategy of a game without seeing all the moving pieces in front of me, right?
Yeah, it's obviously disconnected a lot from the real-time in-person play, but it's not that that's the first time in history that that's happened. People have been playing play-by-mail chess, for instance, for decades. In fact, I think people have been playing play-by-mail chess for thousands of years. If you know some Japanese and Chinese and Indian history, that they've been playing, between princes and kings and lords and ladies for a long time. So I think that it's a different kind of play, right? And I think English authors have played through letters and have written. There's a lot more conversation via writing back then. You just had to wait longer. And so I think there's been a lot written over the course of the years through letters and conveyances like that. And you're absolutely right. It doesn't beat meeting in person, but if it's a kind of communication in its own way, it's kind of communicating. Some players that I've not ever met in person, I've come to enjoy. I really appreciate their play or their generosity in their giving their play time. So there are positive qualities about playing from a distance too.
It can expose you to other types of players, right? That you wouldn't the super competitive to just trying out different strategies as you've been doing. So yeah, it definitely has its use, but it's very situational. I've been finding
for sure. I'm going to
Yep.
mention one last digital board game. I guess it's a
Sure.
board game that I'm just trying out. It's a game that I've been playing for a long time already, though. But Balatro, yes, Balatro, the casino wheel swinging, spinning, ding, 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 sound making, flashy light casino style kind of game of cheating at poker has finally made its way to mobile. So watch out for your wallets and your personal time, because some of you may find that your time gets eaten away. For me, I did end up buying it. I already own it on PC. And I think it's coming free on Apple Arcade, if I'm not mistaken.
Sounds about right. Yeah.
Or included with Apple Arcade. If not now, then soonish is what I heard. So you can just wait for that. For me, it's not really taking a lot of time away because I mostly just play it on PC anyway. And I think I'll probably use it when I'm like traveling, when I'm waiting in an airport or waiting in line for a long thing, something like that. I don't think it's going to take over my life. It hasn't yet, and I've had it for a few days. But just wanted to let people know, if you want something to engage you or want something to avoid because you know it'll be a problem, then that's on mobile.
I'm not letting myself get to it. I played the demo, and that's all I need. Even if that game isn't financially exploitative, but I can feel it sucking at my time, and I just don't. I can't afford another one of those.
Yeah, and the UI is actually a little bit too claustrophobic because everything has just been shrank down from the desktop version.
Right.
I feel like they could have made a few more affordances to make it a little bit more finger friendly, tapping friendly, and tapping and dragging friendly. They only did a couple of small touches. So, I mean, it's very faithful. It's got all the features, so kudos to them for that.
Excellent. So I've not been playing any other games, but I have been reading through some rulebooks for some TTRPGs this last week, prepping for hopefully getting something to the table soon. But I think I mentioned previously I picked up No Thank You Evil, it's a role-playing game for kids. Very, very simple. I've only read through half of that, but wanted to try and run something for my daughter potentially, either with my wife or maybe one of my daughter's friends. We'll see. But it is a very simple system. So the characters don't necessarily have attributes they're raising and lowering and keeping track of stats. They just have some chits that they keep for each of 4 attributes and spend those each time they want it to use a particular ability, right? So pretty simple cause and effect there in terms of tracking that. Pretty simple in terms of the actions that the characters want to take, pretty limited. They'll tell you what you want to do, and then you can sort of translate that into game terms for them, right? And pretty open-ended too, in terms of not having to necessarily fight creatures or get too in the weeds of you can let the kids sort of push the story in the direction that they want to go to, right? So still working my way through that book, but looking forward to trying that with my daughter, and sort of maybe I think it'll be a good way for me to potentially try GMing in a safer, slower environment too, without getting too in the weeds with a more complicated system.
Very cool. Yeah, I own No Thank You Evil as well, and it's from one of my favorite RPG publishers, Monty Cook Games, that does put out Numenera, The Strange, Old Gods of Appalachia, the Cipher System games, among quite a few other non-RPGs as well. They've put out some kind of social interaction games, and I appreciated that system. Unfortunately, I didn't catch my kids at the right time, so it just kind of slipped by them. But I do appreciate what that game did, and I think it looks quite cool.
Yeah, I imagine in most cases it's going to be a stepping stone to something a little more complicated, or a particular IP that they're into, right?
Right. Speaking of playing RPGs with kids and IPs, I actually got to play an RPG with my kids just recently, and it was a game of my own design. So I tried out that RPG hack I was telling you about the other day. It's based on John Harper's Lasers and Feelings, and I got to try it out with my kids. Now, they're sort of the target audience for this because I kind of designed it for them, which is based on a children's licensed property, which I have loved since I was a kid, that I know that they know it fairly well because I used to read it to them. And I'm not going to reveal what the name of it is at this point. I just want to say they gave me some constructive feedback, but I was really happy that it worked well. Like they totally got what I was going for, probably because they're my kids. But the mechanics worked really well. also. It's a super flexible system. Lasers and Feelings, if you haven't had a chance to play it yet, go check it out, or any of the many one-page hacks of this simple but really evocative RPG system that are out there. You can probably find them all on itch.io for $1 or free for a lot of them. So go check those out. And I'm going to keep hacking away at my copy, tweaking it a bit more, maybe get some artwork done, and then I'm going to share it to the wider audience. Of course, I have to get it played with people that are probably not part of my family to get some legitimate feedback from. But I'm hopeful from what I got to try.
So one other rule book I've been reading is I got my hand on an early copy of the Discworld Quick Start. So I think Modifius coming out with that. I think it might be going to Kickstarter or pre-orders soon. I'll double check that. But they've released a Quick Start book with laying out some of the rules and a short adventure with some pre-generated characters. So I've been reading through that. I think I've mentioned previously I had some reservations. I mean, look, I'm a huge Discworld fan. Met my wife through Discworld. Met Terry. That's been a big part of my life. At the same time, I've had some reservations about playing in that world, especially in terms of feeling a pressure to be funny or to be clever, and how well that it would balance that in terms of actually having a sort of forward momentum in the story rather than just the characters quipping at each other, right? So reading through it, I think some of my fundamental reservations have been put away, but there's still some pieces missing as to how this is going to come together. So interestingly, this is largely a trait-based system, which I think you've been talking about similarly with City of Mist. And each character has a bunch of traits from their names are traits, their race, their some core fundamental defining properties, their job. Basically everything on their character sheet is a trait that you can use to tie to an action that you want to take later. And the better you can justify tying that trait to an action, basically changes what dice you can use. So if it's a really strong connection, you can roll a d12. If it's a very weak, tenuous thing that you have no right attempting to do, then you're going to roll a d4. And various options in between. GM rolls a d8, and basically whichever is higher succeeds. So pretty flexible system there. It's largely focused on story beats. You're not like there's no actual combat, right? Similar to Scum and Villainy, like it's just fighting and conflict and everything is dealt through that same interaction action system, basically. So that seems quite interesting. It encourages wordplay and doing puns and things, which like might be a bit much in some groups. But I think that seems to be enough prompts there to give you something to work off of, right? Without it just devolving into just quoting the source material. I mean, look, I've certainly gone through periods of my life where I've defined myself entirely by how much I have memorized Monty Python. A few games are coming out that rely very much on that. I'm trying to be a better person. And I wouldn't want this Discord game to devolve into just quoting. I want to be a little more creative, and people have room to express themselves in new ways. And I think it does have the good opportunity for that, but you probably still need the right group who feel comfortable with the puns and that cleverness. But I think there's some good hooks there, like just actual stories and sort of tables that will create various chaos events to bounce off of.
Yeah, I know what you mean about licensed RPGs. You do feel an attraction to, but simultaneously some nervousness in being able to adequately transport your players into that world and make them feel as though they're playing a part, maybe as equivalent or as significant as the main characters in those published stories go, right?
That as being the greatest hits. Like, oh, it's that guy. I know that word.
Yeah, the sort of fan service like references that go on. Yeah, I have the same feeling when I have tried to tackle, have considered tackling. Like, I think there is even a Monty Python TTRPG, if I'm not mistaken. But other game systems like Dune. There's from Modifius. There's a 2D20 RPG set in the world of Dune, and obviously the world of Dune is vast and very interesting. But It's also heavily focused on one family and their exploits, kind of like Star Wars, I guess you could say. And so much of the world is sort of like not talked about or in the far distance, or so many nerds will fixate so much on canon from all of the dozen or so novels that have come out that you feel a little bit of like tension, like you just can't adequately do the job of representing that world. So it's sort of a tight walk to balance yourself on when you're deciding to play some of these licensed TTRPGs.
Yeah, especially like this Discworld book is going to be focusing largely on the city of Morkborg, which is sort of the central big melting pot, quite literally in some cases, of the big city of this world, where most of the actions are taking place. And I would hope that if this is successful, that there would be other like source books to maybe explore that world more broadly, rather than just zeroing on that one place where everything is happening and all the important people are, right?
Yeah, that reminds me of a game, a game based on fantasy books that I mentioned briefly. There's a system called Cosmere, which is based
Hmm.
on the worlds of
Yes.
Brandon Sanderson's books, fantasy books like Mistwind, Mist World,
Mistborn.
Mistborn.
Hmm.
That's what it is. Among others, Elantris is another one, and apparently that game system is going to actually support all of Brandon Sanderson's books, aside from the Wheel of Time ones that he collaborated on.
Hmm.
All of his original ones, and each of them is going to come with a source book that's going to delve into that particular book series' twists and turns and unique qualities. And apparently the game's all going to be canon. And part of me thinks that's fantastic. That's so exciting. This will be a real treat for fans to just, buy those books. Even if you don't play the games, you can buy those books and learn about how that world works. Kind of like when I was a young person, I would buy the Star Trek: The Next Generation technical manual and learn how the phase manifolds worked in the warp engine systems. Even though those things weren't real, I got to pretend like I knew a little bit more than the average fan about those worlds. And I fear that some game books are more that fan
Hmm.
fan service product than they are a viable game platform that can be played for years and years. But I don't know all fans. I don't know all RPG groups, so maybe they
Yeah.
are.
I mean, it seems that those Cosmere books specifically are almost being thought of as coffee table books. That if you're just fans of that series, it's a cool source book to just further describe that world. But yeah, those IP games often canon can just be fence posts to block you off from being truly free to express your characters, right? I mean, obviously you're free to do whatever you want with these games once you've got them in your hands. But I know I've never been particularly interested in IP based systems.
Yeah, I think in a lot of ways, games that are more neutral, like Scum and Villainy, are a little bit easier to play with, like Morkborg,
Hmm.
in that you're not barred in other than by feels, by vibes. As long as you can capture the vibes, you can play the game and sort of invent fiction that'll fit in that world. Speaking of, I want to talk about some treasure that I discovered at my friendly local game store, Rain
Hmm.
City Games. Unfortunately, those listening won't be able to participate because the sale is already over, but they just had their annual used game sale. And I walked away with a couple of fun treats. I
Ooh.
got 2 books that I was very interested in getting. You mentioned
Oh,
City of
there you
Mist.
go.
I got a couple of big tomes. I'm holding
No,
up
nice.
the City of Mist, Shadows, and Showdowns book, which is, I think, a collection of adventures. And I also got the other equally thick and chunky Knights of Paintown. These are thick books. These are like, Dungeon Master's Guide, Player's Handbook size books, big, heavy tomes. And I got them for half price
Very cool.
at Rain City Games. And I think today was they do an interesting thing. It's like a Dutch auction. So the sale starts on Friday, and first thing the sale price is like 30% off, and then at the end of the day on Friday it's 35% off, and at the beginning of Saturday it's 40% off. Later in day 45, 50, and then the Sunday is like 60-70% off. And I got a couple of other of the last stragglers that were on sale. Just I bought them electronically through their
Yeah, I
web store.
managed to hold off this year. I have gotten some good bargains there previously. I think for Science, you can see it behind me here, very hard to find. Managed to score that in last year's sale. So yeah, it's a great these sort of community used game sales. Great to circulate some things through the local community and find some rare games.
Absolutely. And I like how Rain City Games makes a sort of game of the sale themselves. They're fun and clever that way. So next year, hey, it's not too early to start prepping yourself if you're in the Vancouver area. Okay. With that, should we wrap it up?
Yeah, let's close up here. So, if you have any questions or comments on any of the games we've discussed today, or on our next game that we'll be discussing shortly, you can contact us at omnigamersclub@gmail.com or at our website, omnigamers.club.
That's right. And you can check out our videos at YouTube because we put them out. Each one of the audio podcasts go out on. And if you're catching us on YouTube, you can go subscribe to us on the podcast catcher of your choosing. Please check out our audio platform, subscribe and like, and spread the word if you haven't yet. Tell a friend who might be interested in the sort of games that we cover. Any feedback you send, any comments that you send would be much appreciated as well.
Yep, it's particularly appreciated right now in time when social media it's a wasteland out there.
That's right. So shall we tell the listeners about what game we're covering next week?
Yeah, so once again, next episode, we're going to be talking about Cult of the Lamb. That is the cult simulator / roguelike game. And we'll be having a special guest that we'll be announcing shortly.
That's right. I'm boning up on how to run a good cult and how to whack and slash at some devious bosses. That's right. Yeah, watch out for what you eat and you feed or feed on your flock, possibly. All right. So with that, I guess we'll wrap it up until next time.
Okay.
Have a balanced diet. Yeah, of games, not people. Definitely not people. Just games.
Bye.
Bye.